If you bought your aquarium with a typical aquarium that comes with a plastic lid, you'll know that it has fairly poor lighting, which is quite weak for most plants. You'll also know that it's very difficult to expand this lighting, since most screens aren't designed to adapt to this type of stage. Would you like to move on to this? Let's get started. Okay, there are basically two materials that we're going to need. On the one hand, we have the supports, such as these ones here. These are precisely the ones we use in several tutorials that you can see on the channel, okay? And then we can also use these ones here which, as you can see, have a curved shape and are, for example, the ones used by the Blau brand, but which can also be purchased on Amazon or AliExpress. As for lids, we have three different types of materials that we can use. On the one hand, we have glass. The problem with glass is that it weighs a little and it is also quite fragile, so I personally rule it out. Okay? Then the next material that is perhaps more obvious and that everyone will be thinking about is methacrylate. Yes, methacrylate can be used, but it has a fairly significant drawback that I will tell you about now. For example, here I have a lid, you can see it here. It is made of methacrylate and I used it in a 14L aquarium, which makes it quite small. Look how it is. There it is. Okay, for example, let's imagine that it is placed like this. Due to the condensation of the water in the aquarium, which will accumulate all along the bottom, due to the heat of the aquarium itself or even the ambient heat, what the methacrylate will do is bend in a U shape upwards. Something like that, okay? I don't know if you can see it. I think so, more or less like that, okay? Which forces us to have, for example, this hole, which I made specifically, okay? On the other side, so that we can turn it over every week, for example, every 4 or 5 days, which is when this shape will flatten out again and curve back into a U shape. This happens with lids, whether they are small like this one or large aquarium lids, for example, 50, 60L, 80L okay. In fact, I'm going to show you an image that I have now in the 54L aquarium that I use as a drum, since it is currently bent and presents this problem that I'm telling you about now. Okay, many years ago, when I was young, I said, well, maybe it's too thin, I'm going to buy it thicker. Here it is. Okay, this is a piece of methacrylate that is much thicker. I think the other one measured 2 millimeters, 2 point something. This one measures 4 millimeters. It's not green, okay? It's simply the protective paper, it's transparent. Notice that it's much thicker. You can see it there. Okay? And I say, well, maybe if it's thicker we can avoid this problem. Well, not really, okay? It ends up bending and that's a problem. So that's out of the question. Okay, but then you're going to say, Raul, what material should we use? It's very simple. Here you have a polystyrene sheet. Polystyrene is the key. I think it's commercially called glass plastic. In fact, in all the previous videos where I've mentioned this material, I've called it glass plastic. Okay? As always, I'm going to leave the materials in both the video description and the highlighted link so you can look them up. In this case, I don't know if you're getting it, but it's polystyrene, okay? You can see it there. In fact, I've tried several types of thicknesses. For example, this one here is 2 millimeters thick and this little piece here is 2.5. I've tried it on different lids, on all the aquariums, on the one in the back, and on the ones I have here in front, and regardless of the thickness, they work wonderfully. In fact, I really like this material because it's quite flexible. You can see it here, okay? It's not completely transparent, but that's because it has the protective plastic, okay? It's transparent like glass. The good thing about this material is that it can be worked very well, for example, with a jigsaw. I actually make the cuts with a jigsaw, okay? It doesn't need to be very powerful. In fact, at power level 1, a jigsaw cuts this material perfectly. There are no shavings that are later welded to the plate itself, which happens with methacrylate, for example. And in conclusion, it's a material that's easy to work with and that also fixes the problem that methacrylate had. As I said, methacrylate bends and this material doesn't. If you put this sheet in the aquarium like this, it will last a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 5 months and the material will stay like this. It will not have that curved effect that happened with methacrylate, which solves that problem. I would definitely use glass plastic for this DIY project. Okay, once we have chosen our material, we simply take the measurements of the aquarium, mark them on this piece and cut them out. So it would look something like this, okay? Hey, there it is. Okay, what I personally do is remove all the accessories from the aquarium, the filters, the lights, all types of cables, in short, leave the aquarium bare and only leave the supports. What I do is take the measurements, taking into account the thickness that the support will have and how much space it will take up inside the aquarium. Okay, once the measurements are taken, it is cut out. In my case, I'm going to use this lid in an aquarium where the supports are going to be from the Blau brand, which is why they have this curve, okay, in the corner. Since this material is very easy to work with, you simply make the shape and cut it out. And it would look like this, both at the first end and at the other. Then what I like to do is put the filters, put the heater, put all the stuff in and see where I'm going to place them. Once the final aquarium is ready, what I do is mark the holes I need in the corners, okay? So, you can see it there, I cut it out in each corner and that's it. The lid would now be done. Okay? So, once we have the lid cut to size, we put it in place and test how it looks. In my case, as you can see, it's perfect, okay? With all the holes, both on the right and on the left, for cables, tubes, filter inlets and outlets, in short, all the materials. And there you can see, for example, the supports. There it is. And as you can see, it has a small hole, which is the distance that the support measures, okay? This will also allow the aquarium to not condense completely and to be able to air out. Okay, once we have the lid ready, it already has, for example, all the small holes that we need in case of curvature, whatever, a small hole for food, whatever. When it is ready, we can remove the protective plastic, which I have not actually told you. Both methacrylate and, for example, polystyrene come with a protective plastic. There it is, and when it comes to cutting, painting, doing things, we do not need to remove it. We can work directly with the protector, no problem. Which is very useful because it prevents scratching the lid. Okay, as I said, once we have everything ready, we remove the plastic. Oh, it is hard, huh? There it is on one side. And there it is on the other. Look, super transparent. And as you can see, it looks great. The lid is on and it doesn't seem to be there because it's really transparent, nothing like glass. And here, for example, we have the lid for the 100L, which is made of exactly the same material, okay? Look, in this case the supports are the large ones, the ones I like, with a small free space that is the thickness of the support and that aerates the aquarium. And then, for example, since it can be worked well, there I have the small spaces, for example, for the bottle, for the autofill or even for the filter inlet and outlet. There it is, a little dirty, but there it is. And well, that's how you make homemade lids, in this case for my aquariums, which you've often told me about and wanted me to make this video about. I hope you liked it, I hope you found it useful. As you can see, it is very easy to do and is relatively inexpensive. The smaller the aquarium, the cheaper it is, and the larger it is, obviously, the more expensive. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more videos. See you in the next one.